How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation, and I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and set your notifications to all. We are right on the edge of 190,000 subscribers, and from then, it's 10,000 more to 200K. So help me get there by once again subscribing and setting your notifications to all. I hope you had a great weekend playing some video games and hopefully getting outside. The weather is great here. It's like over 70 degrees, and as soon as I'm done editing this video, I am going back outside because I love it. In today's video, I've got 3 topics for you guys. The first one is that Sony has reached their final battle with Xbox, and one game is the deciding point. The next one is that there's a really cool feature that just got activated on the PlayStation 5 that you can try out for free right now. And the third one is that there's a huge leak surrounding one of my all-time favorite PlayStation franchises, and unless you saw this story, you probably won't guess which one it is. So let's jump into the first news story here, which is, of course, that Sony has reached their final battle. All right, we all know that Xbox has started to release their games on the PS5, starting with Pentiment, Hi-Fi Rush, Grounded, and Sea of Thieves, and they're all kind of different games, right? Like Hi-Fi Rush is a single-player third-person action game that takes about 12 hours to complete. It's a music-based game. I actually think it's pretty good, and out of all these games, that's the one that I personally would try. Pentiment is kind of like a throwback to the point-and-click adventure days, but you're kind of like moving across a painting. I thought it was decent. It's just not the kind of game that I usually engage with. Grounded is a really cool survival game that I honestly think is worth playing as well. And then finally, we have Sea of Thieves, which, like, if it's not the biggest Xbox game in terms of like players and revenue, it's got to be at the top of the list, because even though people don't really talk about Sea of Thieves all that much, it quietly is played by a lot of people, and Xbox is pulling out all the stops with this game, and now we know the reason why. And when I say pulling out all the stops, they really are. They just did a beta this weekend if you pre-ordered the game. They also have exclusive content for the PS5 version of the game, which, you know, if you want to win over PlayStation fans, give them something exclusive when you are literally the maker of the competing console, right? Like, that's a good way to get people interested. So yeah, Xbox really wants this to be a hit, and the reason why is that it's really the make or break moment that's going to determine how many games they actually port to the PlayStation 5 in the future. So if this game lands extremely well and it becomes super successful, Xbox is going to look right at that game and say, okay, we've got something here with releasing games in the PlayStation ecosystem. And that's when you'll start to see games like Starfield or Forza Horizon 5, maybe even the Halo Master Chief Collection, maybe even Halo Infinite, or anything else that they've had in the past that kind of hit well on the Xbox ecosystem, or anything that's coming in the future like Indiana Jones. All of that will be up for grabs for PlayStation ports if Sea of Thieves performs well. And honestly, things are looking pretty good. I predicted back when all this news came out that Sea of Thieves was going to be the most successful one of these games, just because it has a huge community already. It's a very popular online pirate action game, so like, it's a good topic or genre to get people playing on the PlayStation 5, and it looks like it's doing pretty well because that open beta pushed it up pretty dang high on the list of pre-orders on the PlayStation Network store. Personally, I own this game on Xbox. I own it on PC. I don't really like it. It's another live service game. I understand the appeal when you're playing co-op, but none of my friends really play it, so it's really a no-go for me on the PlayStation 5. I did see that Dreamcast guy pre-ordered it so he could play the beta, and he was asking what people think of it because he hadn't played in 5 years, and I noticed a couple other YouTubers actually talking about playing it. So I'm really curious if you're planning on playing it in the comments below. I really don't know how I feel about this game succeeding or not, right? Like, I like the idea, of course, of getting games like Indiana Jones or Starfield on the PlayStation 5, because then effectively I could just sell my Xbox Series X, because I'll get to go forward knowing that literally every game that Xbox releases at some point or another will make its way over to the PlayStation 5. And the big benefit of the PS5 is that you're totally blessed with choice right now. If you want to play pretty much any type of game out there, there's something for you. I mean, if you want an open world samurai Souls game, you have Rise of the Ronin. If you want to play a game that you shouldn't probably play in front of your wife, you've got Stellar Blade, which had a really cool demo that I tried over the weekend and really enjoyed. And then if you want a classic throwback game that's been brought into the modern era, you have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. You've got a ton of games on PS Plus Extra and Essential right now. Like, if these games are going to take a little bit of time to port over to the PS5 for when they actually release on Xbox, it's not really that big of a deal because there's so much good stuff to play already out there just waiting for you on the PlayStation 5. Like, if they start releasing everything, de facto, the PS5 becomes the best console you can own. And I'm kind of questioning why they're going forward with new hardware at that point with Xbox, right? Like, you could imagine how hard it's going to be to sell people on a new Series X or like a Series X Pro or something like that if you have a counter that's that says, well, if I buy a PlayStation 5, I'll be able to play all these Xbox games on that, but then I'll also be able to go play Horizon Forbidden West or Days Gone or, every other game that they have in the pipeline and we're supposedly going to hear about at this showcase that's going to happen in May. The one negative I see as a possibility, but I don't see it as a strong possibility, is that this really works for Xbox and they sell millions more copies of Sea of Thieves on the PlayStation 5 than they ever did on Xbox. They start porting games over like Starfield, they start porting over Indiana Jones. We know that ZeniMax Online's next game is going to be coming to PlayStation 5 because of job listings, and if those keep continuing to do well, Sony is a company that has shareholders and they're going to say, well, the AAA market has been stagnating a little bit. $70 games aren't taking off as much as we had hoped they would, so why aren't you porting your PlayStation 5 games over to Xbox? And honestly, as petty as it is, I like playing on PlayStation. I like that PlayStation is a lockdown ecosystem. I like that when games come out on PlayStation, they tend to run better and look better than they do on Xbox. Like, there's a whole meme going around right now that Xbox Series X is the most powerful console ever made, and every game they've released for it pretty much is going to play at 30 FPS. And yes, I know the argument to that is that if you do use the 60 FPS mode in games like Rebirth, they look a little bit worse, but I'd love to have that choice, right? Like, I don't mind if the graphics are just slightly degraded at 60 FPS in an open world game like Rebirth if I'm going to get a locked 60 FPS, which is exactly what happened with that game. And I like these brands having a different identity from each other. If every game that all these companies makes comes out on the same platform, it's just going to be like spearheading this whole idea that everyone's throwing around that in the future there will be no consoles. You'll be able to play on PC or play on your TV. I don't want that. I want a console with a disc drive where I can go to Best Buy, pay $70 for a game, bring it home, put the disc in my console, and just boot it up as soon as it's done installing. I want to at least have the feeling that I own my games, because I know you don't actually own the games. You're like buying a license to play them. But right now, with the disc-based system that we're using, I can lend games to friends. I can take them over to my friend's house. I can have friends over here and show them new stuff, and all it takes is popping a disc in my console. I know it's like weird nostalgia, and probably because I'm a 30-year-old, but like that's just, I think, objectively a better scenario than like this future where you're going to stream everything to your TV from the cloud. Like, I don't want to play games that way literally at all. I'll just play old games that I can still download on my Steam Deck or my PlayStation 5 or my Nintendo Switch or whatever, because that's how I grew up and that's how I like playing games. So on the one hand, I do hope these games do well because I want these other games ported over to PlayStation. But on the other hand, I'm kind of hoping that maybe it doesn't perform at the level where they say, hey, we're going to port everything. Maybe just in the middle where they say, hey, we'll port some third-party stuff that used to be third-party, like stuff Bethesda makes, like Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield or like Indiana Jones or whatever. But then if it's something like Halo, Gears of War, or Forza Horizon 6, for example, those can stay on Xbox because that gives their insane fan base that they built up a reason to stick around and engage with the platform. Next up here, let's talk about this new feature that just came to the PS5 that you can take advantage of for free right now. So we all know that PSSR is going to be the new upscaling technique that Sony has developed for the PlayStation 5 Pro. And from everything I've heard, it sounds like an actual competitor to DLSS, whereas a lot of games like Jedi Survivor, for example, they use FSR2 or 2.2 or whatever version number it is. And it's not really the best form of upscaling out there. You get artifacting, you get fuzzy edges, you get low res looking images. It just doesn't really look that great, but FSR3 is a huge jump up from FSR2. And I was curious when this would start coming to the PlayStation 5 because of its killer feature, which is frame generation. If you don't know what frame generation is, just to keep it as simple as possible, basically what that system does is it looks at your output frame rate and says, okay, this game is playing at 60 FPS, but it's constantly dropping to like 54, 55, 58. It's like a stuttering mess. It's not looking too smooth. So it reads the frames that are being output by your PlayStation 5, and it literally uses AI to make frames that it can insert at the exact moment that a frame is dropped. So if you input like 120 FPS, it's going to look great because less frames are being dropped. But if a game is limited to 60, it introduces input lag and things like that because it has to introduce more of its AI generated frames. But with the power of the PS5, games can run at high frame rates when they're uncapped. And so yeah, I was wondering when we'd start to see FSR3 kind of making its way over to consoles, because AMD makes the chip that's inside both the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. And since they're underpowered machines relatively to like a high-end gaming PC, that's like a good use case for that kind of technology. And the first game is here. It's Immortals of Avium, which is a first-person shooter that's magic-based. EA put it out last year. It didn't sell well at all, and it caused the studio to basically have to lay off most of their staff, but it's free right now on PlayStation Plus Essentials. So all you have to do is go to the PS Plus tab on the app on your PS5 or your phone, and then you add it to your account, and you can go try out FSR 3.0 right now, which is actually kind of awesome. I want to see this feature coming to games like Final Fantasy 16, for example, where the performance mode works, but it's not the best performance mode. It runs between 40 and 60 to the point where like variable refresh rate really won't help you in a lot of cases, because if you drop below the threshold of VRR, you'll start to see the stuttering and the image breakdown that happens when the performance modes are all over the place. Another great game that just came out that it would benefit from this greatly is Dragon's Dogma 2. They've done a few patches since it came out to lock the game at 30, but the frame pacing is all over the place. You still get frame drops into the high and low 20s. So introducing frame generation and running the game at that unlocked frame rate, which gets closer to 60, that could be really cool for making the game actually perform well while they work on patches to actually fix it up. And to have it coincide with the game being free on PS Plus Essential, I'm sure that wasn't an accident, but yeah, I think it's worth trying out to see if you like frame generation, or if you'd rather just stick with, you know, running the game as intended and crossing your fingers that they actually finish it before they release it. Because here we are a year later and Immortals of Avium finally feels like it's done. I'm sure that game would have sold at least a little bit better if it came out in a better state than it did. And then finally, let's round out the video with this new leak that's got me really excited. So if you grew up in the era of the PSP, the PS3, and really the PS2, a game that you'll definitely remember is SOCOM. They used to have these ads for Walmart because you could like use your headset with the PlayStation 2 to order your squad with commands. It was like a third-person military shooter, and Fireteam Alpha and Bravo were two of my like most played games on the PSP because they had online multiplayer and it was awesome. The series did die out mainly because Sony released SOCOM 4, which had a lot more online features than any other SOCOM game in the past. They released that right around the same time as the big PlayStation Network outage, so having a game that required a lot of online connectivity to actually be played when you can't connect to the PlayStation Network, that didn't really do anything good for sales. And then the studio that made the game, Zipper Interactive, they came out with one more game. It was on the PS Vita. It was called Unit 13. I loved it. I don't think I platinumed it, but I got pretty close. It was like a mission-based third-person sort of stealth action game. I thought it was really good, but because it was on the Vita and because the IP just didn't really land with people, it kind of killed off the studio, and we have not had a SOCOM game since SOCOM 4. So that's why I'm excited about this new leak that's coming from an actor's resume page. The actor's name is David Veach, and on his resume it says that he did motion capture work for a new game for Sony PlayStation called SOCOM 111. And this leak is a little bit weird because SOCOM 111, you could kind of look at that and say, well, maybe that was a mistype on the website and it was supposed to be LLL like SOCOM 3, but people have been digging into it and they haven't been able to figure out if this guy actually did motion capture work for SOCOM 3 way back in the day. I'm truly holding out hope because there is evidence to support that Sony has been working on a new SOCOM. They hired the guy who cleaned up Rainbow Six Siege after its disastrous launch a long time ago. I'm pretty sure he's still at the studio that hired him. Sony's had a bunch of studios working on first-person shooters for a few years now because they clearly see the need for first-person shooters in that first-party slate of Sony games. So if you already have an IP sitting there that's military themed and you know your biggest competitor is taking over the biggest military themed IP in the world, like you would kind of think that it would make sense for the SOCOM Navy SEALs branding to come back with the PlayStation ecosystem, especially considering Sony has been working on first-person shooters for a few years now. And honestly, the timing is great. Sony clearly sees that these games can work thanks to Helldivers 2. That game's a third-person action shooter. It's very militaristic, and SOCOM was always third person. But I'm going to say if they bring back SOCOM, they should definitely switch it to first person because that's the competition that they need to provide to Xbox right now, since once again they own Call of Duty. Anyway guys, that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.